Greetings, AFCM family. Mike Sparrow here, bringing you the September Faith Aid. So you know that part of the mission of AFCM is to equip pastors and churches to be effective in ministering and presenting the gospel, but as importantly is living out the gospel. So today we're going to look at an important subject, especially in the culture we're in right now, and that subject is security. How to protect the people God brings to our churches and to our ministry campuses. And unfortunately, many of the people who come to our churches have been victimized by some sort of abuse. And Jesus has called us to heal the brokenhearted and to bring his peace and love back into those broken areas. Not only that, he wants us to protect the ones he's put in our care. And so it's vital for the well-being of the children, but not only that, the law requires us to be vigilant about it. We have some responsibilities as parents and teachers and youth workers. So today we have one of our own, Natalie Thiesen, who's going to share with us. She's a licensed therapist specializing in battling child abuse and working with people recovering from trauma. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and then I'll be back with you at the end.
Hello, my name is Natalie Thiesen. I am a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Oklahoma, and I am here to talk to you guys today about child abuse reporting. So I'm going to talk about the federal minimums that have been established by the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 2010, better known as CAPTA. And I am going to give you a couple examples of the things that are variations within different states and give you some examples of the state that I'm in here in the state of Oklahoma. But really at the end of this, I'm going to urge you guys to go back and look into what the specifics are for your individual state. Today, we are going to talk about the how, what, when, where, and why of child abuse reporting. So the why of it. Unfortunately, this is a problem that is very, very common across the United States of America. According to the U.S. Child Maltreatment Report of 2024, which is the most current report that we have, there were over 530,000 confirmed victims of child abuse. What we know to be true is that only about 50% of all reports that are made actually get investigated, and only about 50% of those reports actually are able to obtain enough information to substantiate the report. So this 530,000 confirmed victims of abuse is really only about 25% of all the reports that were made. Those of us who are in the field firmly believe that the rate of report is actually very, very, very low compared to what we suspect is really going on. So unfortunately, what that means for us as a nation is that 7 out of every 1,000 children is a confirmed victim of child abuse and neglect. This is something that is staggering for us to think about. And this is happening all across the United States. This is happening in every state, in every city, and honestly in every congregation across the country and globally. So this is something that is very, very important that we pay attention to, and it's something that's very important that we are aware of, and we're taking active steps to protect our children. Unfortunately, we know that the youngest children are at the highest risk. We know that in 2024, there were 1,773 children who died because of abuse and neglect. And children under the age of 1 are at the highest risk of death because of abuse and neglect. And then children between the ages of 2 and 5 are the second highest risk. So what do we do with that information, right? We know that this is a problem. We know that it affects all of us. What do we do with it? According to CAPTA, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 2010, there are federal minimums that were established for every state that accepts federal funding, and that includes all federal land, and it includes federally operated and contracted facilities. So what this law did is that it created federal minimums regarding who is a mandated reporter, regarding having a system by which to make a report and investigate those reports, and also it created a federal minimum regarding the definitions of child abuse and neglect. So we're going to kind of look at that now. So when we look at what CAPTA indicated, when it comes to who is a mandated reporter, there are covered professions that are mandated reporters across all of these United States. So that's going to be anybody who's a healthcare worker, anybody who's in law enforcement, anybody who's an educational provider, or who works at any form of childcare. That includes all foster parents. It also includes individuals who are in the mental health field, as well as individuals who are in the film industry. So everybody who is a covered professional is, according to CAPTA, a federally mandated reporter across all of the United States. But according to the law, there's also individuals. So if an individual is given facts or has learned of facts that give reason to suspect child abuse, that individual, regardless of their profession, is now also a mandated reporter. Now, this is where one of the very first variations comes into place. So every state has taken these federal minimums, and most of them have expanded those minimums and actually broadened the scope of who is a mandated reporter. So the vast majority of states have also included clergy and coaches. Some states, like the state of Oklahoma, have actually made it so broad that it covers anybody who is 18 years of age or older is considered a mandated reporter in the state of Oklahoma. So this is going to be your first piece of homework, is please go back and double check what your state has specifically indicated regarding who is a mandated reporter. Now, we know that almost all of us are going to have to make reports. So the question is, what are we reporting? According to CAPTA, the federal minimum definition of child abuse and neglect is any recent act or failure to act by a parent or caretaker that results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse and exploitation, or any act or failure to act that presents a risk of serious imminent harm. Now, this is a very generic, very broad kind of thing. A lot of things could cover this, right? Now, this is, again, where every state goes in, and many times they get more specific on their definitions of what abuse and neglect is. So, for example, in the state of Oklahoma, we have actually broken up child abuse and neglect into primarily 4 different categories. So the first one being neglect. This is also most common across the United States. It encompasses about 73% of all abuse reports. So neglect is any failure to provide for the basic needs of a child. This can include not providing appropriate shelter, not providing appropriate food, not providing appropriate education or medical care. It also includes not providing appropriate supervision. So what this might look like is, let's say I have a kiddo who comes into church and they're telling me that they don't have a functioning AC and they don't have fans in their homes. Well, it's Oklahoma in the summer, so we got 98 degrees outside and the heat index is significantly over 100. So that is not considered appropriate, that is not considered safe. So if a parent is not actively taking action to rectify that, that here in the state of Oklahoma would be considered neglect. Now, physical abuse here in the state of Oklahoma, we have expanded that definition to include any non-accidental harm or threat of harm to the physical well-being of a child. So this can include anything from biting, scratching, burning. This can include broken bones. This can also include, let's say, somebody got a whooping, right? Like we like to call it here in the state of Oklahoma, but it left marks and bruises. Here, according to our statute, that would all be considered physical abuse. Now, here in the state of Oklahoma, for emotional abuse, we have indicated that, we have defined that as any pattern of repetitive behavior that causes emotional harm to a child. So that could be belittling on a regular basis, that could be name calling, that could be shaming, that could also be withholding love and affection that we know is developmentally appropriate and necessary for child development. So the next form of abuse in the state of Oklahoma would be child sexual abuse. So this is any exposure to any inappropriate sexual behavior, whether it's allowing, encouraging, permitting, or forcing a child to engage in any form of sexually inappropriate behavior. So what that might look like would be if you're at church, right, and you have a teenager that comes to you and says, hey, my uncle who is an adult forced me to do sexual things with him. That here in the state of Oklahoma would be considered sexual abuse. So one of the other things that we have done in the state of Oklahoma is that we have actually included exposure to domestic violence as part of our definition of abuse and neglect, as well as the state of Oklahoma has been very clear on this in our statute, but other states also have started to incorporate this. We also include trafficking as part of our definition of what is considered abuse and neglect and what is therefore reportable according to state statute. So again, this is a very general overview of kind of the differences that you might notice. So we have the federal minimum, and then every individual state is going to potentially give more specifics and more guidelines on what exactly is considered reportable. So here's your second piece of homework. Please go back and double check what that is for you. So we know that we need a report. We know that what we need to report. Question is, when do we do it? According to the federal minimum, it's as soon as possible. Again, this is where we have variation from state to state. So the state of Oklahoma indicates that it shall be reported promptly, but there are other states that give you an actual specific timeline. So there may be states that give you up to 24 hours or up to 3 to 5 days. It really just kind of depends. So again, this is another thing that you need to go back and double check what it is for your specific state. Now, with that, we know why we need a report, we know who needs to report, we know what we're gonna report, and we know when we need to report it. The question is, how do we do that? So when CAPTA was established, they indicated that there has to be a process for every state that receives federal funding that allows an entity of some sort to receive reports and then process those reports. So every single state has an attorney general designated agency that is responsible for doing this. Now, every state's gonna look a little bit different, right? Here in the state of Oklahoma, we used to call it DHS, now we call it Oklahoma Human Services instead of Department of Human Services. A lot of states will call it CPS, so Child Protective Services. Some states even call the agencies responsible Family and Children's Services. So it's gonna look different. The names, the titles are gonna be a little bit different, but every single state has an agency that is designated to be the place where these reports are made. So what you need to do is then go back to your state and figure out what that agency is and figure out what the process for reporting is. So here in the state of Oklahoma, we have a hotline phone number that we will just give them a call. They'll take a verbal report from us. They'll give us a report number, and then we are good to go. They will then take that and investigate according to their processes and procedures. Some states have an online portal that you can fill out a form on. Other states have a form that you can download, fill out, and either mail in or email into the agency. The important thing is go back to your state, figure out what exactly the process is for you, and then make sure that your staff is aware of that as well. So kind of in summary, right, we know that child abuse is a very real problem in the United States. We know that it touches many, many, many lives, many children all across the nation. We know that according to federal minimums, the vast majority of us are mandated reporters, and any of us who have reason to believe that there is abuse happening are mandated reporters. We also know that reports have to be made promptly. We also know that every one of our states has a process for making these reports. With that, I do want to acknowledge that a lot of times it can feel really scary to think about making a DHS report. I hear it all the time of like, but I don't know for sure if this is actually happening, or how do I confirm that? What do I do next, right? What if I'm wrong? Here's the great thing about the federal minimums that were established. Part of the CAPTA law is that there are also protections, what they would call legally immunity, right? There are protections for individuals who make good faith reports. So a good faith report basically means that I take what I saw and what I heard, it gave me a reasonable suspicion, and now I'm reporting it. So to kind of boil it down, it means if you see something, you say something, right? And as long as you're not adding to it, as long as you're not elaborating, as long as you aren't adding in additional information or details and just kind of making that up, then you're golden, right? As long as you are simply reporting the suspicion that was brought to your attention, then according to federal minimum, you will have immunity from civil and criminal liability. Now, I will acknowledge every jurisdiction is going to be a little bit different, so their definitions of immunity might look different from state to state. But the vast majority of states have adopted this because, again, it's related to federal funding. Kind of on the flip side of that, what I do also want to acknowledge, though, is that there are consequences if we don't report, right? I think it's fair to say that we may all have our own moral concerns about whether or not we report suspected child abuse, but also there can be some legal consequences. So because of CAPTA, the vast majority of states have established that if anybody who has reason to suspect abuse fails to report, that is automatically considered a misdemeanor in most states. Now, I will say that for the state of Oklahoma, we've actually taken that a step further, and we have indicated that if there is prolonged delay, so if somebody knows of a situation or suspects a situation for 6 months or longer and they fail to report, that here in the state of Oklahoma is automatically a felony. So keep in mind, right? No, felonies and misdemeanors are not generally the things that we are going for. So there's valid reason to make reports. Now, with that, what I also want to say is this: all you're doing is reporting a suspicion of abuse. You are not investigating. You do not need confirmation that this actually occurred. You do not need to even have proof of it. All you have to have is a reasonable suspicion. Okay, so if we think about this in context of our churches and our organizations, how is this most likely going to play out? What do we do with this information, right? The first thing is please go back to your state, and I will continue to reiterate this. Please go back to your state and find out what the variations to these federal minimums are and how they apply to you. Secondly, please make sure that your church or organization has a policy and procedure for this. And make sure that once you guys have that policy and procedure, you're actually training your staff and your volunteers on this policy and procedure, right? One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that mandated reporting is an individual responsibility. It's actually kind of interesting. The law specifically states that ignorance is not a defense. So the saying, I didn't know that was the requirement, or I didn't know how to report it, does not actually defend you and protect you from civil and criminal liability. So please, educate yourself, educate your staff, educate your adult volunteers so that they can also do what they need to do to protect the church, but also to protect the children that are entrusted to you. Please make sure that you go back to your states and you identify what the variations are for your state. Please make sure that your organizations and your churches have an established policy and procedure, and then please provide training, right? The other thing that I kind of want to touch on today is, what do we do, right? We are in a church environment. We are maybe in a ministry organization. What do we do if a child comes to us and says something that sets off those warning bells in our head that is, oh my goodness, I think there is child abuse happening here, right? The first thing is stay calm, right? Children are children, right? Stay calm. Please try to respond in a way that is not shocked, not surprised, not angry, just very neutral. Be like, oh, wow, well, thank you for sharing that with me. Can you tell me more about that, right? Now, keep in mind, we're not investigators. So we're not here to try to figure out details. I'm not here to figure out all the things of, okay, when did it happen? Where did it happen? How many times did it happen? Who did it? All the things, right? I am not trying to pepper this child with questions. I simply want to give them the opportunity to tell me what's on their minds and to know that they are being heard and that they're being cared for. So we want to, first of all, stay calm. Don't pepper with questions, right? You can definitely ask them to tell you more, but not insist on them answering our questions. The other thing that we want to do is we want to be very, very careful to not promise secrecy, right? I know it can be really tempting because we want to know what's going on. We want kids to tell us these heavy things that are happening, but trust is a really important thing for children, and when trust gets broken, it actually puts them at higher risk of being harmed in the future. So it's very, very important that we don't make promises that we can't keep. what might this look like? Let's say it's a teenager, right? Let's say a teenager comes to you and you're a volunteer at church in the youth department, and they're like, hey, Natalie, I have something I need to tell you, but I need you to promise me that you're never gonna tell anybody, right? Well, what's my response gonna be? My response is probably gonna be something along the lines of, hey, you know what? I so appreciate you wanting to come to me. Here's the thing though. I can't promise that I'm going to be able to keep this between us, because if there is an issue with safety, if you or somebody else is at risk of being hurt or harmed, I have to take steps to try to keep you safe. And I know that you might decide not to tell me, and that's okay, but I want you to know that safety is always going to come first in our conversations, right? So a lot of people might look at me and be like, well, Natalie, you basically just told that kid to not tell you anything. And that may be true. That teenager may decide not to tell me what is going on. But here's what I have done. I have shown them that I am a trustworthy adult, that I'm not going to lie to them. And ultimately, when it comes to safety, trust is very, very important, because most of these kids have actually been harmed by individuals that they thought they could trust that turned out to not be trustworthy. Unfortunately, the statistics are that over 80% of all abuse that occurs actually comes from a primary caregiver, and it's most often a parent, a grandparent, or a step-parent. And so, again, most of the abuse is happening from individuals that are very close to this child, that this child should be able to trust. So I, as a representative of the church, as a representative of Christ, I want to make sure that I am being trustworthy, and that means letting them know that I can't keep secrets, especially if there's a secret about safety. So again, what a kid has come to me, they've shared something that was concerning. I have reacted calmly. I've let them know that I can't keep secrets. Let's say they still decide to tell me. What is my next step from there? Well, if I am a volunteer within the church, my next step is to reference what the church policy is about abuse and reporting. Now, again, mandated reporting is an individual responsibility. So if I am a volunteer and I go and notify the children's director, I am not all of a sudden absolved of responsibility, right? Just because I have notified somebody within the church doesn't mean that I don't still have to follow through with a report. So I want to make sure that I'm following agency policy and protocol regarding how to notify the church and what steps to take, but I also want to make sure that I personally am making the report to the designated agency within my state. So that kind of gives us a general summary on things. My hope for you guys today is that as you've left, you have an understanding of why this is so important, of who it is needs to be paying attention to this, and what we need to be paying attention to in terms of what is child abuse and neglect, as well as when to report and how to report. And I really do urge you all to please go back to your states, figure out what the variations to this federal minimum are for you, and then take some time and make sure that your organization policies line up with those federal minimums, and then make a plan for ongoing training for your staff and your volunteers. Again, we want to do our part as citizens, but we also want to protect the children that are entrusted to us. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for that vital information and for your wisdom on these things. The ability to discern when and where child abuse is happening and how to effectively confront it is really difficult for most of us. I've dealt with several cases in ministry and worked as a liaison and a support for Family Care Network. That's a family services agency in our county. And I encourage all of us pastors to have a policy about how to deal with the reporting and the follow-up. And maybe even call your county child protective services to ask them how they deal with accusations and investigations. And we've had a few of those things going on around us. Even today, a pastor stopped by at my house just to talk, and when we were talking, he mentioned one of his employees had been accused of child abuse by a woman that knows the family and really has some mental illness issues, but how difficult just even the accusation is and managing that. And so you might want to get a hold of Child Protective Services, because some people are afraid to come forward knowing that the questions that are going to be asked, the investigations could jeopardize relationships and friendships. So I encourage you to be prepared. This is a battle we're going to be facing for a while, and being prepared, knowing how to talk to people, how to question the young people, having trained teachers, people that are vigilant, first of all in prayer and spiritual warfare, but that's part of our call, to protect the kids, to help them move forward in spiritual growth and in healthy living. God bless you. I hope you share this with other people on your staff, and let's have a strong, united, protected campuses for our people. God bless.